Perfect. Okay, so thank you all very much for joining. And hopefully, as my email suggested, this is going to focus on the new, or I should say the revised level 3 apprenticeship standard in accounting. So for those of you who don't know who I am, just quick introductions. I head up the apprenticeship programme here at First Intuition in Maidstone. You'll get my contact details following this session if you don't have them already. And do feel free to ask questions as we go through. So I've got the chat box open. I'll do my best to monitor questions and go through this at the same time. There will also be plenty of opportunity at the end to ask questions, and I'm happy to pick up with anybody individually following this if you've got more specific questions as well. So for a little bit of context then, over the past 12 to 18 months, the government and a group of employers have been working on a revision to the level 3 assistant accountant apprenticeship, and that about 4 weeks ago now, 4 or 5 weeks ago, got approved. So it went from draft to approve relatively quickly. And I think the first thing to say is what's really important to note, this is only going to affect new starters that start on or after the 1st of August 2023. So if anybody is sat here with apprentices that are already on programme on this level, they will finish under the previous standard. So this isn't going to affect them. They don't need to transition across or anything like that. So it's only going to affect new starters, if you like. It is a fairly substantial revision. I wouldn't say they've necessarily just tweaked around the edges this time, but I do think it's a revision that is actually for the better. I think it's going to provide more structure, and it should benefit employers and apprentices as well. So what we're going to work through today then, and what I'm going to take you through is just the reworked knowledge, skills and behaviours, so how they look. The professional qualification within it is now mandated, so the AAT diploma. There have been changes to the endpoint assessment plan, which we'll look at, and then how the funding has changed as a result of everything else that we go through. So starting to look at the reworked knowledge, skills and behaviours, and just in case anybody here doesn't have apprentices yet or isn't used to the previous one, knowledge, skills and behaviours in a simple form are learning outcomes that an apprentice is working towards, if you like. And what they've done with this revision is included what they're terming as duties. And you'll see these on the screen now. There's, and I've simplified them, but there's 9 fundamental duties that they're saying an apprentice on this standard should be able to get exposure to. And I think these are really useful because it helps both employers and training providers identify that somebody can get the exposure to the tasks required. So it's really clear from the outset what an apprentice is going to need to be doing, if you like. And it should help just tie up that support that they need. And therefore, we should be in a situation where apprentices are enrolled onto the right level apprenticeship, onto the right apprenticeship as well. The knowledge, skills and behaviours haven't disappeared, but in terms of how it works under, I suppose, this new style, if you like, is that there are knowledge, skills and behaviours attached to each duty. So ultimately, achieving all of the duties should mean that an apprentice achieves competency in all of the knowledge, the skills and the behaviours. And so what we're really looking for is, if I just pop back a slide, is that when somebody starts in these 9 key areas, if you like, that they don't have a huge amount of competency, that some of this is relatively new to them, and that as they finish their apprenticeship, they become fully competent within the 9 duties that are outlined. And what I will do following this webinar, I'll send around the slides and I'll send out a link, as you can see on the screen here, to the revised standards, so you can see the detail behind those duties. The knowledge, skills and behaviours and the duties have all been updated to make them much more, I suppose, relevant to the world of accounting that we all now work in. So there is much more of a focus on digital skills. Previously, it was quite centric around GDPR, whereas now they want to see that apprentices have a good understanding of cybersecurity, which I know is common practice in most employers. There is a focus on inclusive environments and well-being and resilience. So they want apprentices to understand the impact that they have, not just on their technical work, but also the environment of the workplace. How do you build good resilience, and how do you build an inclusive environment? It does now incorporate professional judgment, is the terminology that they're using. This was previously only something that really came up when somebody went to level 4, where it was termed as professional skepticism. But they do want to see that at level 3, they are starting to use their professional judgment and starting to identify when things are human error or deliberate misstatement, if you like. And then the final focus is around sustainability. So they want to see that apprentices are helping to contribute towards good environmental practice. And this can be all of your green initiatives, for want of better terminology, so your recycling policies. And I know many employers encourage people not to print emails and that sort of thing. But there is a heavier focus on that now in this revised standard. And I would stress, don't panic, all of the fundamentals do remain. So as you can see here, the financial and management accounting hasn't gone anywhere. The tax, the communication, accuracy, ethical standards, as well as legislation and statutory requirements. I'm just going to pop everybody on mute. Do feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. As well as ethical standards, legislation and statutory requirements are all still there. So I don't want anybody to worry and think that some of those core concepts that we need our apprentices to develop have disappeared. They haven't. They've just been updated and refreshed in line with the world that we live in now. And that really those are the key changes, if you like, to the knowledge, the skills and the behaviours. One of the biggest changes they have made to this revised apprenticeship is mandating the qualification within it. So believe it or not, previously you could do the level 3 apprenticeship without doing the level 3 AAT diploma. I appreciate that many people wouldn't, but it was possible. And now what the government is saying is that all apprentices have to achieve the level 3 AAT diploma in accounting as part of this apprenticeship. You cannot complete the apprenticeship if you have not passed that level 3 diploma. So just to recap, that means the 4 units that are listed on the screen now all need to be passed, not just sat or courses attended, but physically passed prior to an apprentice being able to go through Gateway and confirm their competency. So that would mean that apprentices need to pass tax processes for businesses, business awareness, management accounting techniques, and financial accounting. And these are the units that fall under the AQ22 syllabus that the AAT have just released. I think the real bonus of this is it ties the professional qualification in nicely with the knowledge, skills and behaviours, whereas previously they weren't always as closely knit. And it now provides good structure. Apprentices will know that you cannot do your endpoint assessment without passing these units. And it gives every employer almost, if you like, a level playing field. You're not going to have some apprentices that go through with units outstanding or where they've not done the diploma, for example. I think one consideration that needs to be given, if you like, and certainly one that we're taking into account as training providers, is any waiting time for exam results to come through. So, for example, if you had an apprentice whose last unit was business awareness, which is perfectly possible and does happen, that has a 6-week waiting time on the exam results, and that would need to be passed. So those results would need to be back prior to an apprentice going through Gateway. We are, as a training provider, factoring that into our timetables. We don't foresee it being a barrier to completion, but it is something that apprentices will need to be aware of when they are booking their exams, if you like. And I think one of the biggest bonuses for all the employers here actually is that by the government mandating this qualification, it becomes an eligible cost, to coin the funding rule terminology. And therefore that's going to impact on what can and can't be funded for the better, I should add, for you guys. And we'll come on to that in a while. Final thing I would say on this slide is that some of you may have noticed there's no sort of reference to an advanced synoptic. There's no synoptic assessment on here, and that's correct. So people under the new apprenticeship standards, there will still be an exam at the end, and I'm going to come on to that, but it is not referred to as the advanced synoptic, and it does not, it is not that similar, if you like, to the advanced synoptic that exists now. So moving on to the update to the assessment plan, or for, I suppose, more common terminology, the endpoint assessment. This hasn't, I would say, fundamentally changed, but there are a few tweaks to it. So there remains 2 assessed EPA components. You have now what is known as a knowledge test, and this is replacing the current advanced synoptic. So where I've just mentioned that advanced synoptic is going, it's being replaced by a knowledge test. And I'll come on to the detail around that shortly. That knowledge test is designed to assess the apprentice's competency against the knowledge elements primarily. So it's their technical knowledge that they're looking to assess there. There is then a professional discussion still, and that hasn't changed. There is one at the moment, and that professional discussion is supported by a portfolio. And again, that stays as it is. So that component hasn't changed. There's a few tweaks to how we go about it, but fundamentally that's there to assess the skills and the behaviours. The government has introduced a merit, however. So previously, for the apprenticeship, the grading was always a fail, a pass, or a distinction, and there was never a merit. And the government is looking to introduce merits across more apprenticeships. And this, as you'll see from the table, really, a merit is reserved for those who get a distinction in one of those components, so either the knowledge test or the professional discussion, but where they then pass the other, so where they don't get a distinction in both. And I think this is a really nice addition, actually, because previously apprentices maybe weren't being recognised for achieving a distinction in one element, but not the other, because that would come out as a pass overall. Whereas now they are able to get a merit by getting a distinction in one and a pass in another. And I think, as I've probably mentioned a couple of times already, it's important to note here that the endpoint assessment cannot be sat without the full level 3 AAT diploma having been passed. So those 4 units that I referenced on the previous page, if I go back, these have to be passed before that endpoint assessment can begin. I don't believe the 4th point here would affect many people, but it is worth noting that they've introduced a line that says any endpoint assessment resits must be sat within a 6-month period of the original result. Now, I don't believe anybody would leave a resit 6 months. I think that's certainly quite rare. So it's not something I'm expecting to become an issue, but it's a line that they have added in. So if we start to look at some of these components in more detail, and the first one I've put down is the knowledge test. And previously, when this was the synoptic, this was always the component that students struggled with. They struggled with it, whether it was commercial or whether it was being done as an apprentice. It was always a really tough exam compared to the rest of the level 3 units. I think this knowledge test removes the duplication that's occurred previously through the synoptic and other assessments. So if I take you through this, it still remains a computer-based exam, which they'll be able to sit with us at First Intuition Maidstone, so that doesn't change. And it does replace the previous advanced synoptic. But now it's going to be 40 multiple choice questions. And when I say multiple choice, either A, B, C, D, drop downs, calculations, but it removes any extended written answer questions, which made up a big part of the previous synoptic. And it was quite often where apprentices struggled, actually. There'll be 4 themes that this test is looking to cover. So, and you'd like to think that these are the most important 4: professional standards and ethics, digital and data security, financial investigation and queries, financial statements and bookkeeping. And you can probably already see how they relate back to the knowledge elements. By removing that extended written answer question, obviously there's no guarantee with this, but we're hoping that as a result, the pass rate improves and apprentices, not that you should ever prefer any exam, but this doesn't become as daunting as it once was. And actually those written answers now occur more frequently through the AAT syllabus. So business awareness, for example, is testing apprentices and any student for that matter on their written answer. They have to produce written answers in that unit. So it's not that students no longer have to produce a written answer at all for the AAT. It's just not occurring in the knowledge tests at the end. It's a 90-minute assessment. So actually what they've done with the logistics around the assessment is interesting. So it's a 90-minute assessment. It's quite a lot shorter than the previous synoptic. And they'll be given a 60-minute sort of preparation and reflection time. And this is because it will be based on a scenario provided. But what is quite interesting is it's going to be an open book assessment. So although apprentices won't have access to the internet, it will be an open book assessment. The pass rate, thankfully, is still 70%, so they've not done anything quirky with the pass rate. That mirrors every other AAT exam at this level. And in order for apprentices to achieve a distinction in this component, they would need 35 out of 40 marks. So I do think this has been changed for the better. It is different, there's no denying that, but I think it will be a preferred exam, although I do appreciate that time will tell on that. I want to take this moment to reassure, I suppose, everybody, employers, apprentices, that they will still be supported on this. So the previous synoptic, there was always a classroom course for, that will remain. We will still teach classroom-based course by a qualified tutor and accountant in order to prepare people for this. We'll be updating the resources, both printed and online, to support this new knowledge test. And the AAT, I know at the moment, are working on updating their endpoint assessment resources as well, so then we can do ours. Potentially the only difference is because this knowledge test is open book, we may need to look at these being sat in sort of their own exam session rather than being done with exams from other units, just because our apprentices like to need more space if it's open book, and obviously there's this reflection and preparation time that they have. So that's the knowledge test component. We are expecting it to be on demand as well. So some people may remember the old synoptic when it used to have to be sat in windows by the AAT. We are expecting this, because it's multiple choice, to be an on-demand exam. We're not expecting the AAT to give windows for it, which will be really good. Component number 2 then, as I've already said, is the professional discussion. And actually the structure of this is very similar to the current one. The purpose of it is that apprentices need to show that they understand the skills and the behaviours of the standard, and that they have been developing and learning that within the workplace, and they need to be able to articulate that well to an assessor. It remains at an hour, 60 minutes in total. Now the AAT are saying it can only have a plus minus 10% allowance. They've been quite strict on that. But as you can see, plus minus 10% of 60 minutes is going to be roughly an hour. There is a change to the structure of it though. So it's going to go from having 4 mandated questions and then some optional ones, if you like, to having 10 questions in total. And the assessor will pick 10 questions from a bank within the AAT that the AAT provide. Sadly, we won't get sight of that bank. I think this will mean that there's more consistency in the discussion, but clearly it does remove the fact that we knew what the 4 mandated questions were, so we do lose sight of those. Although over time and working with the AAT, we should be able to produce quite good mock examples of these questions. This will still be all virtually conducted by an AAT assessor, so that's not changed. In terms of how the portfolio feeds into this, they are, and I think this is a real positive actually, but they want the portfolio to be much more evidence-based and less reflective. So at the moment, apprentices are expected to write quite a lot, and they're expected to reflect quite a lot within it. And the AAT and the assessment plan is saying that that's not needed anymore. We want to see that apprentices are doing this. It needs to be evidence-based. So it should mean that producing that portfolio becomes less cumbersome, if you like, and is seen as less tedious, for want of a better expression. And as a result of this, the AAT are capping it. They're saying no more than 10 pieces of evidence can be submitted, so 10 documents in total. Now, at the moment, the way we work, we don't have apprentices submitting many more than that. I mean, ultimately, the more you submit, the more you've got to remember for your professional discussion. But it does now mean people that wanted to submit loads and loads and loads won't be able to. And they're also saying that witness testimonies must now be by observation and not opinion. So I imagine some of you on this webinar today will have probably written a witness testimony for one of your apprentices, and that might have been that you were providing, I suppose, an opinion on how they perform in the workplace in general. What they're saying going forward is they don't want those. They want it to be based on specific jobs. So they would want witness testimonies to be very much focused on Joe came in and did X, Y, and Z, and this was the outcome, as opposed to Joe's very good at communicating in the office. Now, I appreciate I've used very simplified examples there, but this should really help with providing structure to employers who do write witness testimonies as well. I know from my own experience that sometimes knowing where to start can be as annoying as having to potentially write one. The support, again, just to reiterate, isn't changing. So we already provide workshops for the portfolio and for the professional discussion, and these will remain. Okay, we will still do those. There will be mock discussions, and we'll be able to provide mock questions, if you like, to continue to support these apprentices. And apprentices will continue to receive the bespoke support, if you like, from their coach to build these portfolios. So none of that is changing. We're certainly not leaving anybody on their own to produce this. And that is, I suppose, at a very high level, the updates to the endpoint assessment. So the final thing, and I imagine the one that you're all interested in, is how the funding is changing. And actually, and very surprisingly, I'm not going to lie, the government is increasing the funding band for this from 8,000 to 12,000 to account for the mandated qualification. And actually, this is quite rare in apprenticeships. It is very rare for government to increase funding bands. They're often very tight for providers, and often they're being run in instances at a loss. So actually, this has been a real benefit and allows us to make tweaks through our program as well. Just to recap, if you're a levy employer, this will continue to be funded from your levy pot, so the logistics around it aren't changing where those funds are available. And if you're a non-levy employer, 95% of it will be funded by the government. 5% is funded by yourself of that agreed price. And there remains the incentive for those people that are small employers with young apprentices as well, where the whole programme is funded. But the really good news by mandating this qualification is that all costs associated with the delivery of the qualification and the apprenticeship are included now within that funding. So this means the first sitting of all exams in the level 3 diploma are included, and also the admin costs that we have to pay the AAT are included in those. You'll be aware that there is now a one-off membership cost that the AAT have for these qualifications. That is included with the funding. I think at last check at level 3, that was £225. So that will now be paid within the funding. A bit of a quirky rule, this one, but one they have nonetheless. One resit of an exam across the whole programme is included within the funding. And I just want to stress this is one resit across the programme, not one resit of every exam. I don't quite know why they've done this, but obviously we hope that apprentices aren't going to need many resits, and hopefully one will be more than sufficient. One of the things this has enabled us to do, however, is to look at, well, and introduce a basic bookkeeping course. So particularly with AQ22, what we've noticed is that fundamental bookkeeping and accounting knowledge is really needed in order to complete these units at level 3. And there's probably no denying that AQ22 is harder than the previous AQ16. So we will now be running and including within this a 3-day basic bookkeeping course at the start of programmes to hopefully alleviate some of the pressure for apprentices as they begin these units, but also to help you as employers get some of this core fundamental knowledge into your students early on. There is no exam to this basic bookkeeping course. It's not an AAT unit, if you like. There's question practice and that will be covered within the course, but it is there to build on that, or to build that basic knowledge that apprentices are going to need to complete this qualification. And then the final bit, it's important to know that any further resits of an exam or endpoint assessment must be covered by the employer. So where this is now a mandated qualification and therefore it becomes an eligible cost, resits and that you're not able to ask apprentices to contribute towards. And so hopefully that's a moot point. So what was I supposed to look at finishing up? What are some of the benefits of this? And as I said at the start, I do think this is a positive change. But the updated knowledge, skills and behaviours mean that apprentices are going to learn much more relevant content to what is occurring in the world now, as well as AQ22 being a more up-to-date syllabus. You know, AQ16 by its very nature came out in 2016. So this is going to be a much more relevant syllabus. Those knowledge, skills and behaviours more closely align to AQ22, so there's now a more direct link between qualification and apprenticeship standard. Mandating that qualification provides structure for the apprentice. It will be a lot easier to sort of track exams, so on and so forth. Changes to the portfolio, which I'm well aware is not a component that is sometimes enjoyed by employers or by apprentices, should be much less cumbersome. It should be much less about being able to write something up and more about doing it, which is what an apprenticeship is all about. And then the financial savings by not paying for exams or membership fees from employers is a massive benefit. And I just want to reiterate at this point that remember this only affects new starts from the 1st of August 2023. So I'm well aware that there will be some employers on this call today that for a while will have apprentices under the old standard, and then soon apprentice under the new standard. We're obviously support with that, but I see no benefit, and I won't be advising anybody to transition across, because ultimately most people's programs are going to finish within the next 6 to 12 months. And then I'm going to finish before I'm happy to take questions, is just to look at some of the key changes to the logistics and the program, if you like. So where the exams are going to become mandated, and therefore included within the funding, will book close, or the coach of the apprentice will book close. So at the moment, apprentices for First Intuition Maidstone are asked to go onto an online system and book them themselves, and I appreciate then they're either expensed back to employers or they're using company cards. For those on the new standard, it will be booked directly with the coach, which hopefully again will be a benefit to employers. Again, just to stress, this is for those level 3 students on the new standard. When it comes to the membership fee, or the qualification fee with the AAT, we're going to be reimbursing the employer upon proof of payment. And we had a discussion around whether it was more sensible, if you like, to process the registration with the AAT ourselves, or continue to ask apprentices and employers to do that, and we reimburse. Now, because the membership is for a professional qualification and is so reliant on personal details, we feel that to avoid any miscommunication and to avoid any issues around somebody being a member, it's better for the responsibility for that to remain as is, and then we will reimburse that cost. We will be changing our development tasks. So these are the tasks that apprentices are applying in the workplace to build their portfolio. We'll be making the required amendments to those to support this new style evidence-based portfolio. As I've already mentioned, we're going to be introducing that 3-day basic bookkeeping course, which is already timetabled, I should add, for anybody starting in September. So if you've got people starting, they will get this. And we're introducing some, we're not mandating these because it's down to you as employers, but we're going to introduce some apprenticeship support workshops. So these will be in addition to the portfolio stuff that already goes on, but an opportunity for apprentices to complete some work in a college environment where maybe there's less distractions, and also receive feedback from a coach or from a tutor, depending on who's facilitating the day there and then. So there's going to be 2 every 6 months, or 1 per quarter, if you like, starting from the second half of this year. And these days will be made available, and then it is down to apprentices and employers whether they do or don't attend. So to summarise then, I think that ultimately this is a real bonus going forward. They've certainly taken on board feedback from employers, from training providers who have fed into the group that have produced this. It now enables the delivery to improve, if you like, and there can be additions to that. And it does provide that structure. It does bring that apprenticeship up to date. And actually, although I don't have any insider knowledge, this is the way that apprenticeships are likely to be going. This level 3 apprenticeship is much more like the level 2 accounting apprenticeship now than it is the level 4. And it's worth saying that the level 4 is under revision, likely to come out next year, although again, I don't have any insider knowledge on that. And I would expect that level 4, in terms of its structure and its logistics, to go in a very similar way to this level 3. That was everything that I wanted to take people through. So thank you all very much for joining and coming through that. I'm going to stop the recording. I'll stay on, happy to answer questions either via chat or if people want to come off mic. As I said, if there's specific circumstances you want to discuss, I'm more than happy to have calls or pick up via email individually. So I'll stop the recording, and then if anybody has got any questions, do feel free to ask them. If not, thank you very much for attending.